Welcome.
I was a lighthouse keeper for 1 month. I didn't last that long. This first one comes from a guy who took a short-term caretaker position at a decommissioned lighthouse on the coast of Maine. The lighthouse itself hadn't been active for decades. The light had been replaced by an automated buoy system years ago, but the historical society that owned the property hired seasonal caretakers to maintain the building and keep it from falling apart. He applied on a whim, got the job, and moved in for what was supposed to be a 4-week stay. Let's get into it. I want to be upfront. I took this job because I thought it'd be cool. I just finished a rough couple of years, needed a reset, and the idea of spending a month alone on the coast of Maine with nothing but books and ocean views sounded genuinely perfect. The pay wasn't great, but it covered my bills back home, and the historical society provided the place to stay. The lighthouse had a small attached keeper's cottage, 2 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen. Nothing fancy, but functional. The first week was honestly everything I hoped it would be. I'd wake up, make coffee, watch the water, do my maintenance rounds, checking for damage, noting anything that needed repair, that kind of thing. The lighthouse tower itself was accessible, and I'd go up sometimes in the evenings to watch the sunset. The light mechanism was still there even though it hadn't worked in years. This beautiful old brass and glass Fresnel lens just sitting there, dormant. I'd spend like an hour up there sometimes just reading. End of week 1, I started hearing knocking at night. Not aggressive knocking, not pounding, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door of the cottage at around 2 a.m. First time it happened I was asleep, and I woke up confused, thinking I'd dreamed it. By the time I was fully awake, it had stopped. I checked the door, nothing there. Ocean, wind, dark. I went back to bed. Second night, same thing. 3 knocks, around 2 a.m. This time I was faster. I jumped up and opened the door within maybe 10 seconds of the last knock. Nothing. Just the path leading down to the rocks and the water beyond. I stood there for a full minute looking out. Nothing moved. No boat near the dock. No person. Nothing. By the 4th night, I had my boots right by the bed. 3 knocks came, and I had that door open in about 5 seconds flat. Still nothing. At this point, I'm thinking it's some kind of structural thing. Old building, ocean wind, temperature changes causing the wood to expand and contract. Totally reasonable. I told myself that and moved on. The thing that made me stop believing that explanation happened at the end of week 2. I was doing my maintenance rounds inside the tower, just checking the stairs, the walls, making sure nothing had cracked or shifted, when I got to the top and stopped dead. The lens was moving, not spinning, not fully rotating like it would have when it was active, just slightly. A slow, almost imperceptible rotation, like it had just been touched and was still completing that last fraction of a turn. That lens hadn't moved in decades. The mechanism that drove it had been disconnected. I'd been told this specifically during my orientation. The drive shaft had been physically removed. There was no way for it to move on its own. And yet it was moving. Barely, but definitely. I backed down those stairs and stood at the bottom for a long time. I called the Historical Society the next morning. Told them about the lens. The woman I spoke to, she'd been managing this property for years, went quiet for a second, and then she said, very carefully, "Does it happen in the early morning?" Around 2, maybe 2:30. I told her yes. She said, "That's Henry." She told me that the lighthouse's last human keeper, a man named Henry Marsh, had operated the light for almost 30 years before automation made his job obsolete. He'd been given notice in 1987 that his services were no longer needed. He'd stayed on in the cottage for a few years after that with permission from the Historical Society, but he spent every night going up to the tower to manually rotate the lens, just slightly, just enough to keep it from seizing up from disuse. It had been his routine for 3 decades. He died in the cottage in 1993, alone, in the middle of the night. She said multiple caretakers over the years had reported the knocking and the moving lens. She said it with zero drama, like she was reading from a checklist. I asked her why she hadn't told me any of this before I moved in. She paused and then said, very pleasantly, "We find that people settle in better if they don't know beforehand." I finished my 4 weeks. Barely. The knocking continued every single night. 3 knocks, 2 a.m., without fail. I never opened the door again after that first week. I just let it happen. And every time I went up to the tower after that, the lens always had that same quality of having just barely stopped moving. On my last morning, I did something kind of irrational. I went up to the tower, put my hand on the lens, and I said out loud, "I'm leaving today, Henry. Thanks for keeping me company." I don't know why I did that. It just felt right. On the drive out, I realized I hadn't heard the knocking the night before. For the first time in 3 weeks, I'd slept straight through to morning. Maybe it was a coincidence. Probably was. But I've been back to the Maine coast twice since then, and both times I've driven past that lighthouse. And both times, no matter what time of day it is, I find myself looking up at that tower window. And once, just once, I could have sworn I saw the lens catch the light. My friends and I spent the night in an abandoned lighthouse. One of us saw something in the water. This next one comes from a woman who, along with 3 friends, rented a converted lighthouse cottage on the coast of Oregon for a long weekend. The lighthouse itself was still active, fully automated, no human keeper, but the attached living quarters had been converted into a vacation rental. Sounds fun, right? Looked amazing in the photos. Turned out to be one of the most disturbing weekends of her life. Let's get into our second story. So this was supposed to be a girls' trip. Me, my friend Danielle, my friend Priya, and my college roommate Tess. Tess had found the rental, this converted lighthouse cottage on a cliffside on the Oregon coast. It was genuinely beautiful. The photos looked like something out of a magazine. We rented it for 3 nights, drove out on a Friday afternoon, and pulled up to this place feeling like we'd made the best decision of our entire lives. First night was perfect. We made dinner, watched the light rotating above us. That was actually kind of cool, living right below an active lighthouse. Had some drinks, stayed up too late talking. Normal girls' trip stuff. The only slightly weird thing was that the rental host had left a note on the kitchen table that said, and I remember this exactly because we all laughed at it, "Please do not go to the water's edge after dark." Just that. No explanation. We laughed it off. Assumed it was a liability thing. Cliffs, dark, obvious safety concern. Makes sense. Second night, Tess couldn't sleep. She told us about it in the morning. Said she woke up around 1 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep, so she went to sit by the window that faced the water. The cottage had these big windows on the ocean side, and at night you could see the lighthouse beam rotating and sweeping across the water below. She said she was sitting there watching the light sweep around, and on one of the rotations, in the moment the beam hit the water directly below the cliff, she saw something. She described it as a figure. In the water, just offshore, not swimming, not floating, just standing there in the shallows. Still, facing the cliff. She said by the time the beam rotated back around, which took maybe 4 or 5 seconds, it was gone. She told herself it was a rock, a buoy, a wave catching the light weird. She went back to bed and didn't say anything until the morning. And even then she said it super casually, like a funny anecdote, like, "Oh, I couldn't sleep, and I thought I saw something weird in the water." Danielle didn't laugh. She said, "What did it look like?" Tess described it. Person-shaped, standing upright, maybe chest deep in the water, facing toward us. Danielle put her coffee down and said, "I saw it too." Danielle had seen it the first night. She hadn't said anything because she was convinced she'd imagined it. Same description, figure, standing in the water below the cliff, facing the building, there for one rotation of the light, gone on the next. The vibe of that morning changed completely. Priya was the most rational one of our group, and she immediately started offering explanations. A fisherman, a swimmer, a seal, bad lighting. But nobody was really buying it because the description was too specific. Person-shaped, standing still, facing us. We looked up the rental listing, found the host's contact, and messaged her asking about the "don't go to the water's edge after dark" note. She responded within like 10 minutes. She said it was indeed a safety concern because the path down to the water was unstable at night. Not a liability thing, genuinely dangerous. When Danielle pushed back and asked directly if anything unusual had ever been reported by guests, the host went quiet for a little while. Then she said she'd had a few guests over the years mention seeing something in the water at night. She said the area had a history. She didn't go into detail, just said that stretch of coastline had seen a lot of shipwrecks in the 1800s, and that locally there were stories. She called them local legends, and used that term very carefully, like she was trying not to say anything that would officially alarm us. We stayed the third night because we'd paid for it, and none of us wanted to be the person who made us all drive back early. But all four of us slept in the same room with the curtains on the ocean-facing windows pulled shut. At some point during the night, I don't know exactly what time because I was half asleep, I heard Priya, who had been the skeptic all weekend, whisper from across the room, "Is the curtain moving?" I looked. It was, slowly, like something was pressing against it from outside. We were on the second floor. Nobody screamed. We all just kind of froze. And then the curtain stopped moving. And none of us said anything else until morning. We left right after breakfast. Didn't clean up properly, left the keys in the lockbox, and drove in total silence for like 40 minutes before anyone spoke. I've never gone back to that stretch of coast. Tess and Danielle still talk about it sometimes when we're all together. Priya doesn't. Priya, who had an explanation for everything all weekend, refuses to discuss it. The rental is still listed. Last time I checked, it still had 4 stars. I saw one review that said, and I quote, "Beautiful views. Wouldn't recommend the oceanside bedroom." I didn't leave that review, but I understood it completely. I photographed a decommissioned lighthouse. Something was already inside. This last one comes from a guy who's a freelance photographer. He'd gotten permission from a local preservation trust to photograph a decommissioned lighthouse on the coast of Washington state for a book project. One of those coffee table books about historic Pacific Northwest architecture. He had a full day permitted, sunrise to sunset. He showed up at sunrise with his gear, let himself in with the key the trust had provided, and started shooting. Let's get into our third and final story. Photography is the kind of work where you stop noticing time really fast. You get into a rhythm, moving through a space, finding angles, adjusting light, and hours can pass before you look at a clock. This lighthouse was genuinely one of the most beautiful spaces I'd ever shot. Built in the early 1900s, incredible original detail, the light mechanism still intact, the keeper's quarters basically untouched. It looked like whoever had been living there just walked out one day and never came back. Half-filled bookshelf, an old coat still hanging by the door, a coffee mug on the kitchen shelf. Time capsule stuff. I was in heaven. I was about 2 hours in when I realized I didn't have the space to myself. Not all at once. It was gradual. Little things. I'd set up a shot in one room, and by the time I'd come back 20 minutes later from shooting elsewhere, something would be slightly different. A chair that I was certain I'd pushed aside to clear my shot would be back where it was. A door I'd propped open would be closed. Once, a window latch I'd checked and confirmed was secure had been flipped open. I kept telling myself I was misremembering. Photographers move through spaces quickly and don't always track every detail. I was tired. I'd woken up at 4 a.m. to get there for sunrise. Simple explanations. Then I heard footsteps above me. I was on the ground floor of the keeper's quarters when I heard them, slow, walking, coming from the floor directly above. Creaking old wood, unmistakable. Someone walking around up there. This was a problem because the Preservation Trust had given me explicit confirmation that I'd be alone. No other access had been permitted that day. There was no one else supposed to be in the building. I grabbed my camera bag, heavy enough to swing if I needed to, don't judge me, and went upstairs. The upper floor had 2 small rooms. I checked both. Empty. Nobody in any closet, nobody behind any door. One of the windows was slightly open, the one with the flipped latch from earlier, but it was second story, no reasonable way in or out unless someone had a ladder, and there was no ladder. The footsteps had completely stopped the moment I started up the stairs. I went back to shooting. I was rattled, but I'm a pretty pragmatic person and I needed to finish the job, so I kept going. For the next hour, nothing weird happened. I worked my way up to the tower, which was genuinely stunning. Beautiful coastal light, the Fresnel lens catching everything perfectly. I spent a long time up there just working through shots. When I came back down and started reviewing my shots on my camera's display screen, I found something I could not explain. I shoot fast. I take a lot of frames. When I'm in a space, I often hit the shutter without looking directly at the screen. I'm looking at the space itself, finding the next angle. So sometimes I'll review footage later and find shots I don't fully remember taking. In the sequence from the keeper's bedroom on the upper floor, the room I'd checked for the source of the footsteps, there were 2 frames I didn't remember taking. They were from an angle that suggested I'd been standing in the doorway. Both frames were of the room interior. In the first frame, the room was empty. In the second frame, taken apparently about 3 seconds later, there was someone in the room, standing near the window with their back to the camera. I've stared at this photo hundreds of times since that day. I've shown it to other photographers. I've put it through every kind of analysis I have access to, looking for signs of double exposure, a reflection, a mistake in processing. Nothing explains it. It's a figure, human-shaped, standing by the window, back turned, and based on the clothing, or what appears to be clothing, it looks old. Like period clothing old. Rough fabric, something that looks like it belongs to the early 1900s. I have never published that photo. It's not in the book. I have it saved in a folder on an external hard drive, and every few months I take it out and look at it and try again to find the explanation. I haven't found it yet. I got back to my car at sunset and sat there for a long time before I drove home. I remember looking back at the lighthouse. The building was completely dark, nobody in it, locked up for the night, and feeling this very specific thing that I don't quite have the words for. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling that I had been tolerated, that I'd been in someone else's space all day, and they'd let me do my work, and now it was time for me to leave. I've done a lot of location shoots in old buildings since then. Some of them have had that feeling, some haven't. I've never found another unexplained photo. But I'll be honest with you, I check my frames a lot more carefully now than I did before that day. Every single one, before I move to the next room, just to make sure I'm still alone.